Okay, so let's be honest for a second here.
Always a good start.
Right. Because when you usually pick up a business book or, a self-development classic, you have a certain set of expectations going in.
Yeah, you expect chapters on compound interest, maybe a breakdown of time management matrices.
Exactly. Or perhaps a guide on how to negotiate a raise without, I don't know, sweating through your shirt.
Right, the standard fare.
Yeah.
Practical, logical, safe.
Safe. Yes. But today, we are looking at a chapter that honestly makes most people stop, squint at the page, and
Check the cover to make sure they're still reading a finance book.
exactly, because we are diving back into Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, but we are skipping the budgeting advice and going straight to the most controversial, misunderstood, and frankly, strangely titled section of the entire philosophy.
I know exactly where you're going with this. Chapter 11.
Chapter 11, The Mystery of Sex Transmutation. Even saying it out loud feels a little...
It feels different.
It does. It feels like we took a wrong turn into alchemy or some kind of esoteric magic.
It definitely does. And it's actually the point where a lot of readers just put the book down. They get through the chapters on faith and autosuggestion and planning, and those all make sense.
Sure, standard self-help stuff.
Right. And then they hit this title and think, okay, has Hill gone off the deep end? Is this where the practical advice stops and the weirdness begins?
Because it sounds like something from a fantasy novel. But here's the thing, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today. Hill isn't just throwing this in for shock value, is he?
Not at all. In fact, he calls this the 10th step toward riches. He views this not as a sidebar, but as a structural, load-bearing pillar of success.
He actually argues that without this specific key, you can't really unlock the higher levels of genius.
That's the core claim. You might get rich, sure. You might be competent. But to reach that peak of creative ability, to be a genius in your field, Hill argues you absolutely need to understand this mechanism.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to figure out if we can strip away the 1930s mystery language and find the practical mechanism underneath.
Right.
Because if Hill is right, we are all walking around with a massive power source that we're either wasting or completely misunderstanding.
That is exactly the premise. Hill argues that this is the most powerful human drive we have. And if you can figure out how to stop leaking that energy and instead channel it, it becomes the difference between being just smart and being a genius.
Okay, let's start with the vocabulary because transmutation isn't exactly a word I use in my daily stand-up meeting.
No, probably not.
When Hill says sex transmutation, what is he actually defining? Because I think people hear that and assume it's just about the act itself.
If you look at the source text, he's actually very scientific about the definition. He tries to strip the emotion out of the word transmutation immediately.
How so?
He says it literally just means the changing or transferring of one element or form of energy into another.
Like physics.
Exactly like physics. Think of a waterfall. You have water falling, and that's kinetic energy. If you just let it hit the rocks at the bottom, it makes a splash and then flows away. It's gone. But if you put a turbine in the middle of that fall, you transmute that kinetic energy into electricity. The water's the same, but the output is completely different.
Okay, so in this analogy, the water is the biological drive.
Correct. Hill argues that the emotion of sex is a state of mind. It's a raw energy. And usually, because of ignorance or just tradition, people only think of one outlet for that energy.
Physical expression, which is the splash at the bottom of the waterfall.
Right. And there's nothing inherently wrong with the splash. It's natural. It's necessary for the species. But Hill's point is that if you only have the physical outlet, you are missing the chance to generate electricity.
You're wasting the kinetic energy.
Exactly. He says this energy is so potent that if you block the physical exit, if you delay it, that energy doesn't just vanish, it recirculates.
It recirculates.
Yes, and when it recirculates, it can be turned into a different channel. The drive to create, to build, to sell, to conquer a market, it becomes enthusiasm, it becomes charisma.
This is interesting because he's framing it as a conservation of energy problem. The energy exists, the only variable is where you send it.
Precise.
But I think the skepticism people have, and I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, is that this sounds a lot like repression. It sounds like the old monk in a monastery idea where you just deny your nature to become holy. Is that what Hill is pitching?
That's the most common misconception, and Hill addresses it directly. He is not talking about repression. Repression is pushing a desire down and trying to kill it.
Which usually doesn't work out well.
It's actually harmful. Hill's talking about redirection. It's the difference between trying to stop a river which causes a flood and destruction.
And digging a new canal for the river to flow into so it can water a field.
Exactly.
So you still feel the drive, you just send it somewhere else.
You use the intensity of the drive. Hill says that this desire is the most powerful stimulant known to the human mind. When a person is driven by this emotion, they develop courage, willpower, persistence, and creative imagination that they just don't have in a cool or passive state.
He actually mentions that, doesn't he? He says you can whip a person into a frenzy with fear or anger, and they might act.
But nothing sharpens the mind like this particular drive.
Right.
Because it's existential. It's tied to the continuity of life. It's the deepest programming we have. So Hill asks, why would you want to waste the highest octane tool you have? Why not put it in the tank of your career?
Which brings us to the why. Why is this the ultimate motivator? He uses a really vivid analogy about the hunter in the text to explain the historical context.
Yes, he goes back to prehistoric man. And remember, Hill's writing in 1937, so his anthropology is a bit generalized, but the point stands.
Paint that picture for us.
Well, he asks, why did the caveman become a great hunter? Why did he risk his life fighting a bear or braving a storm? It wasn't just because he was hungry. He could eat berries for that.
True.
He did it to attain status. He did it to please a woman.
He was showing off.
Essentially, yes. He was bringing home the best skins, the best food to gain favor. And Hill argues that civilization hasn't really changed that dynamic. We've just changed the currency.
Right. Instead of a bear skin, it's a corner office or a Tesla or a Grammy.
Or a legacy. Hill writes that if you look at the men who have accumulated great fortunes or attained great power, the underlying motive, the engine running in the basement, is almost always the desire to please or impress women.
He makes a pretty blunt statement in the chapter. He says that if you took women out of the equation, wealth would be useless to most men.
It's a provocative claim, but think about it.
Yeah.
If there was no one to impress, no one to share the status with, would the drive to accumulate excessive millions still be there?
Probably not to the same extreme.
Hill says no. He says this drive is the engine of civilization's progress because it forces men to exceed their normal limitations to demonstrate value.
So the drive creates the action. The action creates the wealth.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have the fuel, the hunter drive, but let's get into the mechanics because this is where the book gets a little woo-woo if you aren't paying attention.
It does.
But I think he's actually trying to describe neuroscience with 1930s vocabulary. He's trying to explain how this affects the actual processing power of the brain.
I completely agree. You have to translate his terms into modern concepts.
He talks about the brain as a broadcasting and receiving station.
Which, for 1937, was cutting-edge tech. Radio was the internet of his day.
Right. But how does sex transmutation actually change the reception of this station? Because he says it steps up the mind.
This is the core of Chapter 11, and you really need to look at it alongside Chapter 13. Hill argues that the human mind responds to stimuli. You can stimulate the mind with alcohol, with narcotics, with fear, with music. But the strongest stimulus is the desire for sex.
And what does that stimulus do to the brain?
It increases the rate of vibration.
Vibration, that's the word that trips people up. It sounds like crystals and new age stuff.
Let's swap vibration for frequency or processing speed. Hill says that when the brain is stimulated by this emotion, it vibrates faster. And when it vibrates at that high rate, two specific things happen.
Okay.
First, it quiets the physical senses. You become less focused on being tired or hungry or the limitations of your physical environment.
Okay, so you're in the zone, you lose track of time.
You're in a flow state. But secondly, and this is the big one, it opens a channel to the creative imagination.
We need to define that because Hill distinguishes between synthetic imagination and creative imagination, and I think that distinction is the key to the whole chapter.
It is the crucial distinction. Synthetic imagination is what most of us use all day. It's taking old facts, old plans, and old ideas, and just arranging them in new combinations. It's data processing. It's logic.
It's remixing what you already know.
Exactly. But creative imagination, that is the antenna. That is when your brain is vibrating fast enough to pick up ideas that didn't come from your memory.
So this is where hunches, inspirations, and sudden breakthroughs come from.
Yes. This is where you get the idea that has no logical precedent.
So Hill's argument is that you literally cannot tune into that frequency if your brain is running on low power.
Precisely. He says the genius is simply a person who has discovered how to increase the vibrations of thought to the point where they can freely communicate with sources of knowledge not available through the ordinary rate of thought. He calls it tapping into the ether.
And the quickest way to dial that knob up to get from AM radio to high-speed internet is
transmuted sex energy. He says you can try other things like mind stimulants or alcohol, but they're temporary and destructive. Nothing else gives you the sustain and the intensity of this specific drive without the crash.
It's interesting because he notes a correlation with age here, and I think this is something a lot of listeners might find validating. He says most men don't really hit their stride until they are 40 or 50.
Yes, he studied thousands of people, remember. He looked at Carnegie, Edison, Ford, and he found that real achievement rarely happens before 40.
Why is that? Is it just experience? Is it just that it takes 20 years to learn an industry?
Hill says no. It's not just experience. It's that between 20 and 40, men are usually wasting their energy. They're dissipating it physically. They haven't learned the art of transmutation yet.
They're spending the capital instead of investing it.
That's a great financial metaphor. They are blowing the principal. When they get to 40, two things happen. They either slow down physically or they finally learn to channel that urge into their work. That's when you see the explosion of productivity.
So it's a discipline issue, essentially.
It's a maturity and focus issue. He lists overindulgence in physical expression as a top cause of failure. Not because it's immoral, Hill tries to stay away from moralizing, but because it's inefficient. It depletes the battery you need for the creative imagination.
Now, there is another piece to this puzzle that I found really compelling, and it moves away from just the solitary individual and looks at relationships. Because up until now, we've talked about the internal drive, but Hill also talks about the external influence, the modifying influence.
Right, this isn't just about sitting in a room alone, vibrating at a high frequency. It's about the dynamic between people.
He has this quote in the source material, "Men are easily managed by the women of their choice."
A line that probably got a few nods and a few frowns in 1937, and maybe even today.
But what is he actually getting at there beyond the gender politics of the 1930s?
He's talking about emotional anchoring. He says that while the raw drive provides the power, it's often volatile, it's explosive. The hunter drive, left unchecked, can be destructive. It can lead to recklessness.
It's a forest fire, not a steam engine.
Exactly. He argues that no man is happy or complete without the modifying influence of the right woman. She acts as the stabilizer. She helps focus that raw energy into something constructive.
He actually says that the right woman can make or break a man's career.
He lists wrong selection of a mate as a primary cause of failure. If the relationship causes friction or jealousy or misery, that energy is being transmuted, but it's being transmuted into worry and anger.
Yeah.
And that destroys success. It lowers the vibration.
But if it's the right partner,
then it's a force multiplier. The partner becomes the reason for the work and the stabilizer during the work. It's a cooperative power.
It really challenges the myth of the self-made man. Even Hill, the grandfather of self-help, is saying you can't actually do this alone. You need the biological drive, and you often need the relational anchor to keep it on the tracks.
It's a power of two dynamic. He observed that the men of greatest genius weren't celibate monks. They were men with high sexual natures who had learned to use that energy, often inspired by a specific woman, a wife, or sweetheart.
So let's try to bring this all together. We've defined transmutation as changing energy forms. We've identified the hunter instinct as the fuel. We've looked at the brain as a broadcasting station that gets stepped up by this fuel. And we've seen how the right partner acts as the catalyst.
That is the roadmap.
So for the person listening who is maybe stuck on a project or writing a book or just trying to get ahead in their career, they're feeling that restlessness, that drive. What does Hill actually want them to do? Because it's one thing to understand the theory, but how do you flip the switch?
The first step is awareness. Most people feel that surge of energy, that restlessness, and they immediately try to resolve it physically to get back to normal. They treat the energy like a nuisance or a distraction.
They want to scratch the itch so they can get back to work.
Right. But Hill is saying, don't scratch the itch yet. Recognize that restlessness as raw power. Sit with it.
That sounds difficult.
Yeah?
And distracting.
It is at first. But the instruction is to take that feeling and consciously direct it onto your problem. Say to yourself, I'm going to use this energy to solve this design flaw, or I'm going to use this intensity to write this proposal.
You're grafting the biological urgency onto the professional task.
You are mixing emotion with thought. And this is the aha moment of the whole book. We know that the subconscious mind only responds to thoughts that are mixed with feeling.
We've talked about that before in other deep dives. Cold logic doesn't penetrate the subconscious.
Exactly. You can tell yourself, I want to be rich 1,000 times, but if it's just words, if it's just cold intellectual data, nothing happens.
Right.
But if you back that thought with the most powerful emotion a human being has, that sex energy, You are effectively shouting into the subconscious. You are handing it a command it cannot ignore.
So transmutation is basically the ultimate hack for autosuggestion.
It is the turbocharger. It turns a wish into a burning desire. And that is what triggers the creative imagination.
It makes sense why he calls it a mystery, though. It's invisible. You can't measure it in a lab easily, but you can see the results.
You see the results in the people who seem to have endless energy.
Yeah.
The people who have that magnetic personality. Hill says that magnetism, that thing that makes you want to follow a leader or buy from a salesperson, is literally just sex energy being expressed through personality rather than physically.
That's why salespeople are often told to have high energy. It attracts.
It creates a connection. Hill warns that if you deplete this energy, you lose your handshake, you lose the sparkle in your eye, you lose the tone in your voice, you become a dead battery. And nobody buys from a dead battery.
That is a powerful image. It reframes the whole concept of burnout, doesn't it? Maybe burnout isn't just working too hard. Maybe it's working without fuel.
Or working against your own nature, attempting to run a high-performance engine on low-grade gasoline.
So, as we wrap this up, the takeaway from Chapter 11 isn't about becoming a monk, and it's not about becoming a playboy either. It's about something in the middle.
No, it's about becoming an alchemist.
An alchemist. I like that.
It's about realizing that you have a source of power inside you that is constantly regenerating. And you have a choice every day. Do I let this dissipate? Do I repress it and let it turn into frustration? Or do I transmute it?
And if you choose to transmute it, you open the door to that creative imagination.
You bridge the gap between your conscious mind and the infinite intelligence, or the ether, or whatever you want to call that source of inspiration.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought here. We live in a world that is incredibly overstimulated. We are constantly being triggered by ads, by social media, by everything around us.
We are absolutely awash in stimuli.
And usually we view that as a bad thing, a distraction. But if Hill is right, all of that stimulus is actually potential energy.
If you can control it.
If you can control it. So here's the question to mull over. If this energy is the most powerful stimulus for action that nature ever devised, and yet most of us are taught to either hide it or waste it, could this be the missing link that explains the gap between talent and achievement?
It's the variable that explains why a highly educated person can fail. And a person with little education but massive drive can change the world. The difference isn't the hardware, it's the voltage.
The voltage. It makes you wonder how much genius is just evaporating every day because we simply don't know how to flip the switch.
It's likely a staggering amount. Hill would say it's the greatest waste of human potential there is.
Well, now we have the manual. It's up to us to turn it on.
Exactly.
So the next time you feel that surge, don't just react, transmute. See what happens when you pour that fire into your work. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.